hmm Yeah, and isn't that the point of writing and communication? And it's that we're connecting our brains together and we're understanding each other
Mm.
more. And to understand each other perfectly, perhaps is a hopeless thing that we're not never going to accomplish in this life. But the more we understand each other, the more we get along.
Hi, I'm Kyle Weckerly, certified professional ghostwriter. I'm glad you're listening as I welcome industry experts to share stories. You'll hear of lessons learned the hard way, overcoming professional hurdles, turning experience into actionable knowledge, and how to connect with your target audience. This is the Career Challenges Podcast. Welcome to the Career Challenges Podcast, and my guest for this episode is Josh Steimle. Josh Steimle is an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and creator of the 7 Systems of Influence framework used by parents, educators, and business and community leaders to build influence and increase impact. His first book, Chief Marketing Officers at Work, was recognized by Success Magazine as one of the 5 best business books of 2016. Josh has also written over 300 articles for publications like Fortune, Time, Forbes, Inc., Mashable, TechCrunch, and Entrepreneur. And so it's kind of humbling to have you on the show today, Josh. So thank you for dropping by.
Thanks so much, Kyle. I'm humbled to be on here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And you're in Boston right now, is that correct?
That's right. I'm in Boston, been here about a year. We were in China before that.
Yeah. So I want to touch on that later, obviously, but let's first focus on the 7 systems of influence. I've read over them. I think it's amazing, but of course, I think it would be best if you were to explain it in your own words for those listening, so that they understand really what it's about, because you'll probably explain it better than I could, and then they can get excited for it when it comes out in a book soon, hopefully, and then look into it more. So, what are the 7 systems of influence, Josh?
So, to make it brief, they are vision, genius zone, audience, content, action, collaboration, and love. And of course, we can go into more depth on those, but those are the basic 7 systems of influence. Anybody that you look at from history or today, and you look at highly influential people, you'll be able to see them using these systems to one degree or another.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So why influence? Why focus on just influence?
So the thing that's interesting to me is that there's this saying, knowledge is power, right?
Mm-hmm.
But knowledge by itself is not power. Otherwise, you could just go read a bunch of books and then you could do anything. But to get anything done, we have to influence other people. We have to get other people on board. We have to recruit, partner. It's very rare that anybody does anything by themselves. And even if you do something by yourself, you're influencing yourself. So knowledge is great, but by itself, it's not enough to get anything done. You need influence to actually make things happen.
All right. So what prompted you to write about influence? What was that, I guess, moment looking back where you're like, okay, there's something going on here with influence. It's not just what I know or maybe who I know. It's really the influence that is kind of that X factor in making things work. Was there a specific kind of moment that you can recognize and talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I've been running a marketing agency for the past 20 years. So marketing is influence. And so I've been interested in marketing for a long time. But what really turned me on to focusing on this was that I was running my agency, and in 2013, we almost went out of business. We were broke, we were in debt, and we had hired somebody, an account manager, and we lost all our clients pretty much. We had 3 clients left. And I was staring down bankruptcy and failure and having to go get a real job, which I would hate to have to do. And I got this opportunity to write for Forbes magazine. And it just kind of dropped out of the blue. And I thought, this would be fun. This should be interesting. And so I started writing for Forbes, and it was an incredible experience. It brought in a ton of attention to my business and started generating leads. And over the next few years, I was able to track millions of dollars of revenue coming into my business because of these articles I was writing. And that writing for Forbes opened the door, and it led to writing opportunities for about 24 other business publications and a book deal and a TEDx talk. And then a few years later, I found myself sitting on Richard Branson's island talking to Richard Branson. And I'm thinking,
wow,
how did I get here? Like, what just
Yeah.
happened? And it was just kind of a miracle to me that all of a sudden I was associating with these people that I had been reading about. And it was just incredible. And so I started thinking, like, how did I do this? Because it wasn't a plan, it wasn't a strategy. I didn't set out to get into these publications and do all these things. It just kind of fell in my lap. And so I started becoming interested in researching this. Like, if I did this accidentally, how could somebody else do this on purpose? And so I started researching influence and just reading every book I could and looking at articles and studying people. And this framework started to develop in my head where I said, you know what, there are things that these people do over and over and over again. And that's where their influence is coming from. And maybe if I could isolate what these systems are that they're using, maybe I could use that to spread my message and get the word out about things that I want to share. Maybe I could help other people to get their message out. And so as I kept on analyzing and researching, I boiled it down to these 7 systems of influence that successful people use.
Awesome. And is it, I guess, just influence? Because, I think some people would probably see that and say, well, if I do just these 7 things, I should have the same impact as Oprah and Josh and Richard Branson. Is it just the 7 systems?
Well, there's more to it than, hey, just follow these systems and you're going to be the next Oprah or something. Mm-hmm. And we all have different dreams too, right? I mean, not everybody wants to be the next Oprah. So the way that these systems work is it all starts with your vision, your dream. It's what do you want to accomplish? And for some of us, it's, I just want to make it through the day. I want to make sure the trash gets taken out and the dog gets fed. And I would kind of like it if my children didn't mouth off to me. Like, that's the dream.
Yes.
And you can use these systems to figure that out and figure out how to make these things happen. Or it's, I want to lose weight, or I want to get into a good relationship, or I want my business to grow. I want to find a new job. These are all things we want. And the systems work for getting all these things, regardless of what they are, whether it's influencing somebody else or it's influencing yourself. These systems give you the tools that you need to make things happen.
All right. And so are there times looking back on your own life where you realize I was using that system here with this person, or that system here with this kind of niche, and I may not have been realizing it? Have there been those moments for you now that you're looking back?
Yes, it's one of those things, once you internalize the systems, you see them everywhere and you can't stop seeing them. And so I look at everything and I'm like, oh yeah, I was using this there, I just didn't know it. Or I was using this system there, I didn't know it. And I look at everybody around me, and all day long I'm seeing people do things and I think, oh, there's system number 4, that's content. Oh, there's system number 2, that's Genius Zone. And so I see it in everything now, and it kind of ruins movies and everything for me.
Oh, true. Was it Donald Miller's story brand framework, the seven story brand, how he breaks down the monomyth in marketing, and then he says, well, when you watch a movie now, it's going to ruin it for movies. And I didn't realize that when I read his book, but also I've been doing that for years, of course, as a ghostwriter. Now that I watch movies, and I really want to be hypercritical, and that was something that my wife and I had to discuss early in our marriage, my hypercriticalness of shows and movies. And finally she threw a book at me, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Creative Writing, and said, you go write it, okay? If you don't like it, you go write your own book. And so that was a learning opportunity for me to realize, okay, not everybody wants to hear my opinion on this.
I've had the same experience. I don't say anything to my wife during movies anymore about like the craft of the movie, because then she's like, well, you just ruined it for me. And I'm like, oh, dang it. So I'm just like, just keep your mouth shut till the end. Just don't say anything.
Yeah, and it's especially worse for me with X-Men movies. I have to admit, I grew up loving X-Men, and they were my comic book, my thing. And then they started making movies, and then the movies didn't go how I feel they should go. And this is a whole other topic, of course, that, if we really wanted to get into, we probably could talk for hours on. But we were watching one of the X-Men movies, and they introduced this mutant, and the mutant's power was obviously not what it was in the comic books. And then right then I was on my soapbox, like, this is wrong. And my wife paused the movie, and I thought she was giving me the time to talk and air my grievances. I was like, what do you think? She goes, you said you weren't going to do that in movies anymore. So it's like, she was just like, okay, let him have his moment. and then we can get back to watching the movie, and he won't bother. So finally, that was my moment where I realized I'm like, I got to shut up about this.
Yeah. It's hard to keep your mouth shut sometimes, but got to do it.
Yeah. So when it comes to the 7 systems in your own business and possibly your own life, Josh, which one of the systems would you say is your strongest? And then conversely, which one of those is kind of not your strongest?
So that's a good question. Nobody has ever asked me which one I feel strongest about, but I would have to say probably the one that jumps to the forefront for me is content, because I'm a writer, I'm producing tons of content. It's very easy for me to put out content, whether it's epic emails or writing LinkedIn posts or articles or blog posts or whatever. It's just, that's a piece of cake for me. But the interesting thing is the content flows from the systems that come before it, the vision, genius, zone, and audience. If you have those 3 lined up, then the content becomes easy. If you don't know who your audience is, or you're not sure what your genius zone is, what it really makes you unique and what your message is, then it's hard to produce content. That's where writer's block comes from. Or if you don't have a vision, if you don't even know why you're doing it, then that makes it hard to just get up in the morning and produce anything. And so I have the first 3 systems somewhat down, but that makes the content easy. And then, it's just the stories come into my head, and so it's easy for me to put out a bunch of stuff. So I guess I would say content is the one that comes to mind first.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So then what was your, I guess, not strongest system, if you're comfortable sharing that?
Oh, probably collaboration. Collaboration is system 6, and collaboration that's how you can get 1,000x return on your investment, because nobody works alone. Mm-hmm. Even authors. I mean, you've got, I forgot what her name is, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, but...
Oh, Harper Lee.
Yeah, Harper Lee. Like, you would think, like, yeah, she just wrote that book by herself, right? I mean, she didn't collaborate with anybody. That was all her own stuff. But she wasn't writing her book. And she had 2 friends who came to her and said, we know you've got this great book inside of you. We are going to pay you for a year. We're going to give you a year's worth of salary to quit your job and go write the book. And that's what she did. She quit her job. These people paid for her to live for a year, and she produced To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, that's collaboration.
Wow.
But
I never heard that. I didn't know that that's how she was able to write her book.
Yeah, thank goodness for those 2 friends. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this book, this amazing book. So there's always collaboration going on, but when you collaborate with other people, you can focus on your strengths while they focus on their strengths, and you can get more stuff done. And I'm not very good at that. It's hard for me to reach out to people. It's hard for me to involve people sometimes. It's just easy sometimes to say, you know what? I can just write stuff and I can create stuff and I'm fine. I'm good. And you don't involve other people. Whereas if you did, you might be able to produce 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times the content and have that much more impact and influence. And so that's one of the ones that I'm really working on, to try to collaborate more with people and partner with people more so that I can get my message out there, and then I'm helping them too. And everybody wins. The audience wins, I win, the partner wins, everybody benefits.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So then where do you feel your expertise in writing content comes from? I mean, were you always a writer? Was there a specific kind of, I guess, book that you read as a kid that just really influenced you to become a writer later on in life? I mean, what was it?
I don't think it was any one particular book I read. I think it was all the books I read. I grew up loving books, and I thank my mom for this, because my mom sat next to my bed when I was 3 years old and fed me apple slices and read me books, just one book after another. And so I was raised with this love of storytelling and this love of books. And that was my addiction. I just grew up and I was just always a voracious reader, and the librarians knew me by name and everything. And so when I started writing, which I didn't start writing until I was in my 30s, and I got this opportunity to write for Forbes. I mean, I blogged before, but nobody really read it. And I wrote stuff, but I didn't think of myself as a writer. And then when I started writing for Forbes, I realized, gee, I'm kind of okay at this, and people seem to enjoy it. And hey, I'm getting a lot of attention here, and I love this. That's when I started to see myself as a writer, and I asked myself this question: where did this come from? Because this just flows out of me. It's so easy to do. And I realized I've got so much in me from all these books I've read over all these years that there's just all this information it's easy to grab stuff from here and there, and it just flows out. And I know how it should sound and how it should be structured because I've read so much. I don't think you can be a great writer without being a voracious reader.
Definitely. Yeah. Because Stephen King mentioned it, and then a couple other authors mentioned it, that if you want to be writing, you always have to be reading. There always has to be a book in progress that you're reading. And, that's true because when I was not reading, I noticed when I tried to write, it sounded so much worse than when I was reading. And you've probably noticed this too, that, those times where you're not reading or you're not really focused on taking in information, what comes out may not be of the quality that you're used to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when you've read a lot, you write that stuff down and you just look at it and you just know, you look at it and you're like, nah, there's something wrong here. And maybe you don't know how to verbalize it and say what it is, but you just know something's wrong. And so you play with it and then you're like, yeah, that flows better. And, where does that come from? How do you know that flows better? I don't know. It just seems right. It just sounds good. Yeah. Well, that's all that reading coming back out.
Definitely. So then who is your favorite author, if you want to go as specific as nonfiction and fiction?
Well, you mentioned Stephen King, and Stephen King is not my favorite author.
Even though you're in the Boston area, you're not a Stephen King fan?
Yeah, I am, but I'm not. I don't like any of his books except for one, which is his book called On Writing, which is about the craft of writing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the best book that's ever been written about writing. I've read a few, maybe there's a better one out there, but that book is incredible. Half of it's biography, half of it's tools and about how you craft your writing. But that book, somebody said, oh, you got to read this. And I was like, I don't like Stephen King. That guy's a sleazeball. His books are terrible, and I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm not into that genre. And then I read this book, and I got to the end of the book. I was like, I love Stephen King. He's amazing. I want to give him a hug because I read his biography, and I read about all the tough times he went through and the hard stuff and almost getting killed, hit by a car, all these crazy things. And I thought, I really like this guy. I probably disagree with him on politics and all sorts of things, but I like him as a human being. Mm-hmm. And that book is just incredible. I love reading it.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard so many people say, you've got to read that book if you want to be a good writer. And somebody actually sent out a prompt. She was wanting to put together an article on the best writing advice. She said, what books would you suggest besides Stephen King's On Writing? Like, she knew people were going to automatically suggest that. She's like, what other books are there besides just his? So I think it's kind of become a keystone to any sort of writing training that people want to do in this day and age. And I think that speaks volumes about, how Stephen King wrote that book, which is quite amazing. So,
yeah, and there's some other good books out there. There's like Bird by Bird and Writing Down the Bones, and there's some the other books I can't remember at the moment. And they're not great books, but On Writing was just so clear and to the point, and it was great. Speaking of another author I love is David McCullough, who writes all these history books now.
Oh, yeah, David McCullough. I loved reading his stuff when I was little.
Oh, I read these epic biographies. He wrote John Adams. He wrote Truman's biography. And he's got all these history books about the Brooklyn Bridge and about the Panama Canal. And they're so interesting. These are actually topics like, if you had asked me how interested I was in the Brooklyn Bridge, I would have said, about 0. It's a bridge in New York. Great. Yeah. But then I read this book and there are all these people and things that happen. And he has a way of creating a narrative that is so clear and easy to follow. And I've read so many other history books by famous historians, and I'm getting lost in these books. I'm like, wait, who is this? And did we just skip forward? Did we just skip backward? I don't know where I am in time. And with David McCullough, I feel like there's none of that. It's just pure communication. It's flowing out of the book into my brain, and I don't even know that I'm reading. It's just like I'm watching it, and there's a real talent there. He makes it seem simple, but there's a talent there once you read some other books and you realize, no, this guy's really got it together.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I remember reading about Watergate, All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, and how that made it more real to me. And I really enjoyed learning about, this political event that happened, whereas I hate politics. I hate listening to politics and people discuss politics because it's always this back and forth of you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no, 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 you're wrong. And to put it into a human perspective, or telling their story from a first person narrative, I think really made it more accessible to me, and that's what I enjoyed about it. And there was another book, Stories of a Boy Soldier, I think is the name of it. I can't remember exactly, but it was about a child soldier from Africa, and he wrote about his experiences in the first person, being very, very honest about it, very frank, but also saying, I understand if you don't understand. This may not be what you're used to, and I'm trying to put it into words that you can understand. And so for me, I'd heard about child soldiers, and I knew, there's bad things happening, but it just seemed like this, this thing off in the ether. And when he wrote about it, it made it so much more real to me that it's like, well, now I feel I understand, and I've walked in his shoes a little bit, and, getting so much more out of it. And it's like, well, now I know, or I have more of a emotional reason for why I should be supporting, these other programs to stop that practice in those areas. And so I was like, yes, we need more stories like that. We need more writers like that.
Yeah. Have you read the book West with the Night by Beryl Markham? Have you heard of this book?
No, I haven't. That's a new one. I'm going to put that on my list.
You should read this. Everybody should read this. It was Hemingway said that she was the best writer of all time. I mean, that's quite a testimonial, right? We would all love to have that testimonial.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I've actually got the quote right here. He said, "She has written so well and marvelously well that I was completely ashamed of myself as a writer. She can write rings around all of us who consider ourselves as writers." Anyway, this book, West with the Night, it's one of these books. It's about her life in Africa, growing up there and all this crazy stuff she went through. But she has this talent to just bring you into the book, and you feel like you're watching a movie or something. It's just, I've never been to Africa, but I'm reading this book and I just feel it. I feel like I know what she felt because her writing was just, the communication was just kind of off the charts.
Yeah, awesome. And right now I'm reading Option B by Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook, and talking about her losing her husband. And it's like, well, now I understand more that perspective. I never would want to lose my wife. I never would want to, die before I'm supposed to. And so that it puts it into that perspective and understanding, okay, I'm not a woman, obviously. I will never understand what goes through my wife's head, but in reading her perspective, Sheryl Sandberg's perspective, it makes me appreciate my wife more. And that's a good thing. We always want to appreciate our spouse more. And so those kind of stories I think are just awesome, and I want to eat them all up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and isn't that the point of writing and communication? And it's that we're connecting our brains together and we're understanding each other more. And to understand each other perfectly, perhaps is a hopeless thing that we're never going to accomplish in this life. But the more we understand each other, the more we get along, the more we have productive relationships, the happier we all are. I mean, that really is kind of the goal, isn't it? Is to take two minds and bring them closer together.
Yeah. I always equate it with, that old adage, when you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, you understand them more. So, doing that more, walking in more people's shoes so that I understand more of the people, maybe next door, but also on the other side of the world. And, that's what I want to do as a ghostwriter as well, is get more of those stories out there so more people are walking in different shoes, if I were to take that analogy to its most extreme. And more understanding and empathy is spread throughout the world. So then hopefully we can find better ways for handling disputes or conflicts, or, maybe shortages of resources. So that way it's, we just make the world a better place. And I see that books can be the real spark or inspiration for solving a multitude of problems. And so that's why I always love, talking about books, and then how people put them together, and, all that stuff anyway.
And now you're speaking my language again, because empathy is part of system number 7, which is love. So
yes.
We've come full circle.
There we go. That was my plan all along. Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Go to careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. While you're there, check out other episodes and download them through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. The Career Challenges podcast is hosted by me, Kyle Weckerly. I'm a certified professional ghostwriter who works with business thought leaders and industry experts to write polished manuscripts, assess their publishing options, and create book marketing plans. I've worked with consultants, high-ticket salespeople, coaches, speakers, C-level executives, and business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. My authors want to write a book to serve as a platform for their marketing endeavors. They know that becoming an author will help them secure speaking gigs, market their expertise, promote a product or service, and more. Are you ready to turn your experience, knowledge, and stories into actionable advice and connect with your ideal client? Then visit WeckerlyWriter.com to schedule a consultation today and begin your publishing journey. That's WeckerlyWriter.com. WeckerlyWriter.com. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast. So the seven systems of influence, of course, you're talking about. I mean, you're spreading that knowledge, and you're going to be turning it into a book, correct?
That's right. I'm working on the book. I've been working on the book for years. Anybody who's written a book knows how that goes.
Yeah, it's not something you just churn out over the weekend. Some screenwriters say they can churn out a screenplay over one weekend. I'm like, well, that's great, but writing a real book takes some serious commitment here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I remember years ago somebody told me that nobody writes a book once; they write it 20 or 30 or 50 times, and I thought, oh, that's a lot of work. I don't ever want to write a book. And then I got suckered into writing my first book, and I realized how true that was, that it doesn't matter what the book is. If you write a book, you don't write it once. You write it so many times. Yeah,
because you're editing and making sure that you're getting that exact wordage right to get that idea across. So,
yep. And especially with a framework like this, I'm always testing it out. And so I'm putting content out there. I'm speaking, I'm putting it out on LinkedIn, I'm publishing blog posts. And then people have comments and they're like, well, have you ever thought about this? And I'm like, dang it, I got to rewrite that part. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah. Don't you love it when that happens? They open up your mind and like, oh, man.
Yeah. On the one hand, I'm like, yes, it's going to be better. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, man. More work. It can't be done yet.
True. Well, you presented a nice segue for me there. Thank you. Your first book, Chief Marketing Officers at Work. What was that like writing that book? And of course, where did you get the inspiration to do that?
It was an amazing experience. I got to interview 30 CMOs from smaller companies, but also some big ones like GE, Target, Home Depot, Spotify, PayPal. It was kind of a dream come true as a marketer to be able to talk to the people who had reached the pinnacle of the marketing career and to understand exactly what it was like to be them and what their life was like. And where the book came from was I was working in my marketing agency. I was living in Hong Kong, and we went in to sign a deal with a client, and we walked in. There was a new person in the room, and I thought, uh-oh, I don't know this person. We're here to sign a deal. It's never a good sign when there's a new person in there when you're about to sign a contract. And sure enough, we pulled out all the paperwork and she says, oh, no, we're not signing anything today. I'm the new CMO. I just got hired yesterday. We're not signing anything with anybody until I audit what's going on and figure out what our direction is. And I was like, dang it. I walked out of that meeting so bummed. And I went back to my team and I said, these CMOs, they can make or break our deals. Like, we should reach out to these CMOs, because if we could come in from the top and have them on our side, then it would be easy to sign these deals when we're talking to the other people. And so I thought, I should do some research. I should write maybe like the digital marketing guide for CMOs or something like that. And so I started doing research because I realized I don't know anything about CMOs really. I mean, I know marketing, but I don't know what it's like to be a CMO. I've never been one. And so I started doing research and I realized there are like no books about CMOs. And a few years earlier, I had read a book called Founders at Work. It's by Jessica Livingston. She's one of the founders of Y Combinator, this startup accelerator in the Bay Area. And I loved this book. It was just interviews with founders. It was like 30 interviews. It was fascinating. And I thought, And I knew there were other books in this series. There's Lawyers at Work and CIOs at Work and all these things. So I thought, well, I'll just go check out the CMOs at Work book and I'll read that and then I'll understand CMOs and then I can write this book. And I went looking for CMOs at Work and I couldn't find it. And finally I ended up on the publisher's website because I was like, this book has to exist. And I ended up on the publisher's website and it wasn't there. But I found this link that said, would you like to write for us? Send us an email here. So I emailed them. I'm like, maybe you have this book in progress or something and it's not there, but if nobody's writing Chief Marketing Officers at Work, I want to write this book because this would be great research for me to understand CMOs, to actually write this book. And I write for Forbes. I know how to write business stuff and I know how to interview people. So I gave them this pitch and they wrote back and they're like, yeah, this sounds great. Here's a deal. And they sent me a contract and sent me an advance and everything. I was like, all right, there was my first book deal. And then I went out and I did the interviews and slapped it together and we had a book. That makes it sound really easy, but it wasn't that easy.
True. Yeah. Because you probably had to coordinate with all these different CMOs and then do the interviews and then come back to them and say, okay, here's how it's going to be in the book. What do you want to change? And then what else was part of that process, for turning it in from idea into a final polished manuscript?
The hardest part was the interviews, like you say, scheduling the interviews. I had one CMO I scheduled 10 times, and she quit on me every time, including twice while we were 10 minutes into the interview. She's like, all of a sudden, she's like, something just came up. Sorry, I got to go. We'll get back together. She never made it into the book. 10 times scheduled with her. And
well, it's not like you didn't try.
Oh, yeah. She knew I was really trying. She knew I wanted her to be in there. And that was the hardest part. And by the time I was done, and yeah, there were revisions. I mean, some people, I'd send them their interview back and say, hey, is there anything here that you want to correct that was misspoken or that you didn't quite mean that way? I wanted it to reflect their real thinking. And most of them would just write back and say, yeah, it's great. And I could tell they didn't even read it. They didn't care. And they were fine with it. And then I get the CMO of PayPal who sends me back this complete, it was all red. He printed it out, redlined everything, changed everything. I'm like, this isn't even the same interview we did, and it's not as good as what you told me over the phone. So there was that, trying to work things out like that. But in the end, it all came together. By the time it was done, I was like, man, I thought this would be easy. Just interview a bunch of people, slap together. I've got a book. And by the end, I was thinking it would have been easier to write a book out of my own head, doing my own research, than doing all these interviews and figuring out how to coordinate everything and work with everybody. It was a ton of work, and I have so much respect now for anybody who's written any book and gotten it published, because I know how much work it takes. Even to write a book that's not good, it takes so much work. So just anybody who has a book, I'm like, oh man, mad respect.
Definitely. So then, like you said, you had to do all this coordination and spinning all these different plates with all these different CMOs. What is it like now to be writing, the book version of 7 Systems of Influence compared with Chief Marketing Officers at Work?
Well, it's fun because it is all in my head and I don't have to depend on anybody else. At the same time, I do want to collaborate, System 6. I want to go out there. I want to involve other people. I want to get other people's thoughts and ideas into the book. And so I know that that's coming. As I've developed the framework, I've started reaching out to people and say, hey, do you have experience with this? Do you have a story you could share that relates to this? And so it does require me to still go out and put a lot of information together. And I think in the end, I'll look back and I'll say, actually, this was a lot more work than doing those interviews. But I want to produce something great. I want to produce something that really helps people, something that I look at and think, man, I want to read this. This is so good. I want to read it because this is helpful for me too. And I need to revisit all this information. I don't want to just write something to have a book. I want to write something that makes a real difference.
Definitely. Somebody, of course, far smarter than me and a much better writer said it, that if you can't find the book you want to read, you need to go write it. Yeah. Or write what you like to read. So, I always take that to heart when I'm writing something. It's like, how would I want this to be written so that I'm interested in it? And, sometimes that doesn't always intersect with what the reading audience really wants or will really respond to. So part of that is, working on my own ego here.
Mm-hmm. It's since you bring that up, when I was writing for Forbes, I would split my time between writing what I wanted to write and writing what I thought the editors wanted me to write. And when I wrote what I wanted to write, I would just come up with an idea and say, yeah, I'm going to write about this. And I would just spit it out, hardly do any editing, no research, barely any quotes or anything. I was just throwing my ideas out there on paper and getting it out there. And I would get great response from this, tons of reads, emails, comments, engagement, and everything. But I felt like, well, I'm not really doing a good job on this stuff, though, because I'm not spending much time in it. So then I'd go write an article and I'd research and do interviews and I'd source all this stuff and I'd get these great quotes and put a ton of effort into this article, and I'd publish that. And it was just crickets. Nobody cared. Nobody engaged with it. Nobody seemed to like it, except for the editors. Those were the articles that the editor would write back and say, oh, this is a great article. And I'm like, yeah, it's got like 300 views versus 300,000 views for my other articles. Like, nobody likes this except the editor.
Huh. That's an interesting paradox.
Yeah.
So now looking back on your career, pre your first book and post your first book, how is it different for you?
I think because I have my first book out there, I'm a little more relaxed about it. There's a little more confidence there, I guess you could say, because there isn't that pressure of, oh, this is my first book. What if everybody hates it? What if nobody likes it? I mean, of course, I still feel that about this book, and any book I'll ever write, I'll feel that way, but it's not the very first one. And so it's kind of like, I've been through this once before and I've got my expectations in line. I know that it's not going to be this great, I'm not going to sell 10 million copies of this book. And so my expectations are tempered. I know how much work it takes. I know that not everything will go as planned. It'll get out, it'll get published, and then I'll find something in it and I'll be like, I can't believe this mistake made it into the printed version. I just know that stuff's going to happen. And that's the way it goes. And so I'm a little bit more relaxed about going into it, and I'm enjoying the process more.
Awesome. And then how has writing a book affected your business? I guess if there's any cons in there, but mostly pros. Let's talk about pros too.
Yeah, I mean, as far as cons go, I don't think there's been any cons I can think of really, because it's really changed the business. I mean, I guess this is a con, is that I'm changing the name of one of my businesses because of this book, because I started out with one business name for my second company. I have a marketing agency called MWI, and then I have this other business called Influencer Inc. that works with executives on personal branding and such. And so I called this business Influencer Inc. And then as this book started to take shape and I realized I was going to call it the 7 Systems of Influence, I started thinking, why do I have this business called Influencer Inc.? That doesn't mean anything to anybody, but I'm going to have this book come out. This really should be called 7 Systems, should be the name of this business, because everything that I want to do is tied into these 7 systems. So now I'm going through this rebranding thing, and so that's the downside, is there's a bunch of work happening as I change the name. And of course, the guy who owns 7systems.com wants $30,000 for the domain name. So there's all these things I'm having to go through with that. And but on the positive side, it's kind of created a different business that I feel much more passionate about, because Influencer Inc. was kind of like, yeah, I want to help people become influential because I believe most people are good. And if I can help people become more influential, then they'll use that influence to do good things. And that's where Influencer Inc. came from. But with 7 Systems, it's much broader. Influencer Inc. was focused on executives and entrepreneurs in the business world. Whereas with 7 Systems, I'm realizing, man, once I'm done with 7 Systems of Influence, I want to write 7 Systems of Influence for parents, and it's 7 Systems of Influence for teachers and for different audiences, because I'm realizing this, I'm a parent and I'm seeing how this applies to my parenting and how I work with my kids. I'm seeing it apply to all my relationships, and I'm realizing there's a lot more here than just a business book or a business application. So that's the great part of it.
Awesome. Now that sounds impressive. Expanding out to parents and educators, not just because I'm a parent, but also my wife's a teacher. So I'm like, yes, we do need more books for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
With your with your business, Influencer Inc. and MWI, as you were building that and trying to incorporate, the 7 systems and the things that you do, what were some of the challenges that you faced in building up your businesses?
Time. I mean, it's hard to write a book and run 2 businesses at the same time. So MWI, I turned it over to partners, and so they're running it, and I'm just tangentially involved in it here and there. And Influencer Inc., the same thing. It's hard to manage it and give it the time it deserves, and so I've brought in partners to help me out with that. And it's hard then to find time to write the book. And so I'm working on all these different things in parallel and trying to partner with people, collaborate with people so that I can get all this stuff done. But that's the hardest part to manage, is that I love doing lots of things. I like doing lots of things. People say you need to focus on one thing at a time and do one thing really well. And if you try to do multiple things, you can't do them well. Well, there's certainly something to that, but I think that by taking on the right types of partners, you can do a lot of things and do it well, because you don't have to do it all. You don't have to be the one pushing it. If you can find the right partner, sometimes things work out better without you. I mean, my marketing agency is running better with me not running it. So I still get to quote unquote run it and say, hey, I started this agency. This is my agency. But I have virtually no responsibilities there.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, that's the American dream, right?
Definitely. All right. So then you said you got the 7 systems of influence, and you're working on that, and you're going to be writing a book on that as well. But what's next for you? Anything else that's on the horizon for Josh Steimle?
Well, it's the book, it's the businesses. For the past 7 years, actually, going on a kind of personal note, my wife and I just adopted a 14-year-old girl from China, and we were working on that adoption for 7 years. And for so long, people have been asking me this question, what else are you doing? I'm like, we're working on this adoption thing that is not happening, and finally it happened, and now it's like, we're not working on that anymore. Now we're working on integrating her into our family. And so it's so nice to be on the other side of that. In the future, also, I'm working towards going back to school and doing a PhD. I'm interested in studying, researching business strategy, and specifically government policy and entrepreneurship and startups and such, which is something near and dear to my heart. And that might sound totally unrelated to influence, but there is a tie in there somewhere.
Yes. Well, you are going to be hopefully influencing policy, or at least changing minds about entrepreneurship and all that entails.
Exactly. Everything's a stepping stone to something else.
True. And getting away from business here a little bit, when we had talked earlier before you came on the podcast, and I'd sent out some questions, to get some talking points. You said one of the things you were trying to learn was how to skateboard on vert ramps. So I just wanted to check in and see how that's going.
Yeah, it's the last time I tried was about a week ago. I didn't get hurt. That's the good news. I grew up as a skateboarder. I started, I think, when I was about 10 years old. And when I was a teenager, I made it to skating on these big vert ramps that are 12, 13 feet tall. And I was able to drop in and ride and do 1 or 2 tricks. And then that was it. That's as far as I got. And then I just didn't have the chance. I was never around that for a long time. And now my 9-year-old son has gotten into skateboarding, so we go to the skate park together, and they have one of these big ramps. And I tried dropping in on it about 4 months ago after 25 years of not having touched one. And I had the worst fall of my entire skateboarding career. I got worked over by that ramp, and I thought, okay, I need to work up to this a little bit more. And so I'm working on it. And one of these days, maybe you'll see me in the X Games doing a McTwist or something. Who knows?
Awesome. Like Tony Hawk.
Yeah, if they ever open up like a veterans section, like 50 and over or something for guys who aren't that good, I might make it.
Right. Because I remember watching Tony Hawk. He had done like 7 spins at once. It was like some huge number of rotations. Yeah,
it was a 900 degree rotation. So it's 2.5 times around, which isn't as impressive as 7, but 7's actually impossible. So
true. But we keep talking about 7 and coming back to 7, so that's what was stuck in my head. So 2.5 though.
Yeah, so a 720 is two full rotations, and then a 900 is two full rotations and then coming back in. So it's like you go up facing forward the way you normally ride, and then you rotate around two times and you come back in forward again. He was the first person to ever do that. Now all the kids are doing them, but he was the first one.
Awesome. So someday you'll do a 900, right? On a vert ramp?
Not in this life, but
but you're gonna try, right? You're gonna try.
We'll see how far I get. I'm just working on dropping in and being able to ride on the ramp without killing myself.
Awesome. Oh yeah, and one other thing we talked about, you have a LinkedIn book coming out in May, right?
Yeah, so this was unexpected. This is like the kid that you don't plan on having, and then all of a sudden you find out you're pregnant. I've been working on LinkedIn a lot over the past 3 years and just enjoying producing content there and figuring out the algorithm and how things work. And I found myself coaching people and producing courses and everything. And so I started sharing all these tips on LinkedIn. And after I shared a bunch of these tips, I realized, gee, I've got so much material here. I could just slap this together and I'd have a book. And so I took my 60 top tips and I created this book called 60 Days to LinkedIn Mastery. And so I have a publisher, and that will be coming out in May of 2020.
Awesome. So that's going to be your third book. So you're really racking them up here.
Well, that'll be the second one, because that one will be published before Seven Systems is even done being written. But I started Seven Systems ahead of time, but Seven Systems will be published third. I hope. I hope there's not a different third in there.
Maybe. Well, I'm sure it'll get done, but let's think positively. It will get done.
Yeah, I'm shooting to have Seven Systems done by the end of 2020. So hopefully I can make that goal.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you will. You've got the skills. You've already done the writing, so I'm sure you'll get it done. So yeah, Josh Steimle, thank you so much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today.
Thanks so much, Kyle. It's been fun to chat.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Career Challenges podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com for more information. Schedule your free consultation with Kyle Weckerly by visiting weckerlywriter.com today. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com. Thank you.